So we're on track 3 of TruLondon. We are going to be talking about the candidate experience. I think for most of us it's a subject that we're really passionate about. It's a burning subject and it's going to become one that is increasingly important as that shift of focus moves from the employer having kind of the big say in everything to skill shortages and the weight being placed more on candidates. Joined today by lots of experts in the industry. Bill Borman, founder of True, is going to lead this track. So over to you, Bill.
Yeah, and I think really the starting point for everyone is just understanding two things really. So we talk about candidate experience. So first of all, what do we think a candidate is? And secondly, just briefly, what does everyone actually think good stand actually is? Because everyone says we need to make the candidate experience better, but kind of what are we trying to make it better to?
And have we ever asked the candidate?
Have we ever asked the candidate? So, Stephen, what about for you? What's your view?
Well, my view is that very little work is being done by the providers of online services in looking at the process from that direction. Candidates are thwarted and frustrated with the varying standards that are available. Take most of the online platforms now, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. People have gotten used to how they work. People know how forums work, for example, going back to 10, 15 years ago when they started with message boards. So there's a language that people understand, but the language or the processes that candidates have become used to in online recruitment are frankly they've gotten used to it not working for them. So they've got low expectations. And they're very rarely being delighted by a service. They know that in many application processes, whether it's on an employer's website, and they wouldn't know technically that they're going from the website to an ATS, they just know that halfway through the process everything changes and it's really frustrating. And they really want to apply for the job, but it becomes a test of how determined they are to apply. And that can be the case with, as I say, job boards, with employers' websites, with recruitment agency websites. Recruitment agencies often, they treat candidates as if they are a job board and not a recruitment agency with intimate knowledge of the marketplace.
There's one point that you've brought up that I'd perhaps like to go to Lisa or Stephen for your opinion on this. You've said that the online providers are not doing enough to make it easy. Is it really the online? You're an online provider, so you're maybe the best person to answer that, Stephen. Is it really your job to make it better for candidates, or?
Yeah, I'm one of the owners of a niche job board, and I think that the way that we treat the candidates reflects upon our clients. If we treat the candidates like crap, then the candidates, by and large, don't differentiate between their experience on our site to when they go over to the employer site. And in fact, when you talk to candidates, most of them don't understand, like you were saying, Stephen, they don't understand the difference between when they're on
They just want to apply for a job to X company.
They Google, they see a job someplace, they see the company name. The fact that our logo's on that page doesn't really mean that much to them. They hit our apply button, and then they go over to the company site, and then they go to the ATS, and then they go to an assessment process, and mostly it seems to have been designed by goblins. It's a really horrific experience for almost all.
But I guess my thinking, and it really came on when you said this, Stephen, and the two Stephens.
It's a great name, isn't it? You spell it wrong, exactly but that's right.
It's actually thinking about it and saying, right, okay, is it really the job board's position to provide a candidate experience? Because I actually think, as a technology provider, you will build the technology to the minimum expectation of that client. Therefore, if you're not providing that, the clients can't be demanding that.
The thing is, it's not a democratic marketplace. Candidates aren't in a position to assert themselves and say, we won't stand for this. It's not like supermarkets and they'll go and shop somewhere else. They go wherever the job is.
I respectfully disagree.
I'd like them to assert themselves. I don't think they can.
At least in the job board industry. Because the reality is that the vast majority of jobs are advertised in many, many places.
Yeah.
And candidates, few and far between, are actually going after a specific job. They're going to a job board because they don't know what job to apply to. They don't know what employers
Is
are
that not changing
advertising.
though? Because one of the things you brought up, which I think is a really important point in it, you've perhaps gone through 4 layers of technology. So by the time you end up being a candidate, by the time you end up actually applying, you've probably gone via an aggregator, an Indeed or Simply Hired or
Multiple.
multiple. You've
Yeah.
got, so that's probably what you found on the search. So I Google,
Yep.
I find a job, so I start with Google, that's
Yep.
my first experience.
Mhm.
I then hit an aggregator, that then takes me to a job board. The job board may then take me to a career site, the career site may then take me to an ATS. There might be some middleware in there somewhere as well that I've got to go through.
And
I
Bill,
might-
as well, to that point, I think we should start looking at the candidate experience a few steps before they even get to the job application stage. It starts with really building the employer brand, and could be thought leadership content. It could be really positioning your company brand in the marketplace in ways that are more than just the job. Giving career advice, asking the candidate what kind of content they want to learn about, conducting surveys of how do you like to receive content, what do you want to learn about, what do you want to do. I think it starts far before they even get to the point that they want to apply for a job.
Employer branding is only possible when you've named the employer in the advert. When the
Yes.
advert's anonymous,
Yeah,
the
so
candidate's frustrated.
Lisa, how's it different for an agency then?
From a candidate experience perspective, I don't think it's necessarily a consideration as part of the process, which is a shame.
Mhm.
I think that the technology negates the process in a way. The technology has removed parts of the traditional recruitment sequence, or maybe it's not removed it, it's sped it up so quickly that you can't see it so quick. And so therefore the time that traditionally recruiters might have spent developing relationships and understanding their model and their geography, because they were limited in geography 20 years ago maybe, they were limited in sectors. Now the world has opened up so massively, they have become less selective about what they work on, which means again they have less time. The technology that they have their paws on a daily basis drives the process so quickly that there's no time to draw breath and think about the experience and therefore think, well, if I was a candidate, how, even stupid things like, I don't, as a recruiter, would I go to my own website and try and apply for a job and see how a typical candidate would go through that very small sequence in the overall recruitment process. So not finished any sentences there, but I think from an agency perspective, I think technology has disabled the traditional recruitment process quite significantly, and I do think technology suppliers could really lead the way in fixing it and making and creating that benchmark.
Is it really, the reason I'm asking this, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but I have we get the technology we deserve because it's the technology that we demand, because we demand with the pounds or dollars that we spend. So I know that if there was a genuine forceful movement to change the way technology works, and Steve runs a job board, if I was a collection of customers and I said, right, you're getting no more dollars till you change this, and actually we're going to spend our dollars in this place because the candidate experience is better, he'd suddenly that would become top of his agenda.
Not necessarily. And I'll tell you why. Because as an owner of a job board,
Yeah.
we have two masters. Yes, we have the employers that pay the fees to advertise their positions. We also have the candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't take care of both sides, we have neither. So it's a balancing act, and we have to do what's right for our client, for the employer. We also have to do what's right for our client, the candidate.
Which is exactly what Lisa's saying about the agency, the same situation.
Yeah.
I think the point that's really interesting, though, Lisa, that you make about the way that it's sped up so quickly. It's kind of the impact of that on the reverse side, and it's like social media. We're all used to that instant gratification now. We send a tweet or we put something on LinkedIn, and things.
If I ask you a question, I expect you to reply. I don't expect to wait for a reply.
And that's what I think has a major impact. And how do we address that from candidate experience, that people want to know? They don't want to know in 2 months' time whether they've.
But they want to know.
What about for you?
More than wanting to know quickly.
Yeah.
They want to know.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Tell us about your
I totally
experience.
agree. I mean, I'm from the corporate recruitment side, so not so much on the agency or the job board side, but I've worked with in those aspects as well. And I believe that from a candidate experience perspective, people want to, see things and do things quickly, easily. So the technology behind that, process should be very straightforward and very direct and giving quick results, as a matter of fact. So I think that's what people are looking for when they apply and
Is looking for quick results.
Absolutely.
There's a couple of things I'd pick up on. Number one is, which was the first question I asked really, is when is someone a candidate? Because what I've noticed, certainly from the Candidate Experience Awards, when we've looked at people who would be considered to have a good process, the feedback's positive, it's being monitored, one of the things that's very clear is they view candidates and applicants as two different
Absolutely
processes.
agree.
So a candidate, so the three levels we're looking at is you have a lead, which is someone you're connected with, but you don't have enough data or information on them to qualify them into a certain path. A candidate is someone who's connected with you. An applicant is only an applicant when they're going through that actual apply process.
Yeah.
So a lot of everything that we've talked about in terms of technology, job boards, all the rest of it, is all good stuff. But we've really been talking about the applicant process. Where do we apply? What happens when we apply? What happens in the ATS? The really interesting thing from the Candidate Experience Awards is if I asked everybody here to give a top 5 list of their complaints that they think candidates would have, from a recruiter's and technology point of view, they would do that and they'd give me a list. When I go and look at the Candidate Experience Awards, what the candidates are complaining about is completely different. It's not the thing. So for a classic example of that is actually the number of complaints about an ATS black hole was quite small from a candidate point of view. When people actually said, what are your complaints? Well, their real complaints were with things like real-time feedback, human things actually in process, not technology stuff. So for instance, from the UK point of view, 51% of candidates had a panel interview somewhere in that process. Only 5% of those candidates knew they were going to have that.
Interesting.
So actually the things that the candidates were saying in terms of candidate experience were not technology things. So while I think there is a lot of stuff in the technology that leaves a lot to be desired, looking at what the candidates are saying, I think it's much more around the side of the human bit of it, of saying, the things candidates are saying is, look, if I go for an interview, I don't expect to get the job, but I want to be given every opportunity to get that job. I don't want to go away thinking, if I would have known, if this would have happened, if I could have prepared, I would have done.
I don't think that those two things are actually all that different. Because from the candidate's perspective, they don't know anything about an ATS.
No.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even if you explain an ATS to a typical candidate, their eyes will glaze over and they will say, that's very interesting, did I get the job or not? They don't really give a rip what tools you're using. From the recruiter's standpoint, the recruiters are fundamentally important. They're important for efficiency, for effectiveness, for compliance. So from a recruiter's perspective, they can use that technology tool, the ATS, to communicate with the candidate to tell them, you are going to have a panel interview in 2 days, and these are some of the questions that we're going to ask you, and then here's the process. So from the recruiter's standpoint...
I don't actually know any ATSs that wouldn't enable you to do that.
Correct. So the technology is there, it's not being used properly, and I think from the typical corporate recruiter's perspective, that then becomes a technology problem, because none of us like to look in the mirror and say, we're the problem.
The problem's
It's
between
much
the
easier
chair
to
and the
blame
keyboard.
the ATS, where the reality is for about 10 years, every ATS has made it really, really easy to communicate with every candidate, every step along the way.
If you choose to.
If you choose to do it. So it's a choice. It used to be that some of the ATS did, and some of them didn't. Now, all except the worst do. It's the recruiters who are choosing not to, and they'll blame legal. Because God forbid that candidates are actually told that they're no longer candidates.
Yes, and I think that was, Stephen, you've been very involved in the US awards, I've been very involved in the UK, and we've obviously looked at each other's research and data. And those were the things that really strike me out of it, is that the things that people are complaining or talking about are usually out of control of the people doing the talking. So as a recruiter, you probably are not the person who buys the ATS. You probably don't even, and the amount that you influence that process will be quite small, if at all, when that buying decision is made, or if you've got it, you have that technology for the next 3 years because that's the contracted period, whether you love it or not. And you just have to figure out the best way of working with it while keeping your own secret Excel spreadsheets and all the other stuff you do, and drawers and whatever. But it's actually that bit of saying, okay, sometimes we're talking about the problem in such a big way that we're not looking at it and saying, what are the things we can actually affect personally? What I noticed from the Candidate Experience Award winners was it was very clear that most of those, that wasn't a corporate decision to provide a good candidate experience. That there was a recruiter or a head of talent acquisition who was actually saying, what are the human things we can put in place? What's going to be our interview process? How are we going to give candidates feedback? Who's going to give that feedback? When are they going to do that? How are we going to communicate? How are we going to make sure we always tell people what's going on? I think that we allow the technology, and I'm not saying there's not things wrong with tech, but we allow the technology to be the smokescreen behind what we should actually be doing.
The technology's become the process.
Yeah, as it is in a lot.
Hence, yes, the humans and the humans need to make a decision to kind of break free from that. But I suspect that maybe the agency world would go too far the other way, and almost like disengage from tech altogether and go back to traditional methods, which is a bit of a shame because I think you get a really good blend. And I do think that one way to fix the process and get the sequence back in order is for the technologists to just do it and get the technology and to really help the typical agency recruiter communicate more effectively. I think that it's incumbent on you guys. I mean, I still look at the job board posting model and I still remember what it did to the industry way back when. Now, what it's turned into is gorgeous because it allows us to access data in ways that we couldn't. The big data concept really began to a degree, big sweeping statement maybe, she says, and backtracking quickly, at the beginning of the 2000s when you had all this aggregator stuff and the ability to feed
But we
into
don't get to
different
the
systems.
answers because we don't know the questions.
Absolutely.
That's the issue. We don't actually know what it is we want to actually get because we don't know the questions.
I just think we need to really rapidly move away from the systems that just allow us to do as much as we can as quickly as possible, and the systems need to now train us how to become more selective with how we spend our time and train us to start thinking about what's in front of us in the data, because the big data question isn't how much data can I get my paws on, it's what the hell is it telling me that will enable me to change my process and make me more effective?
Do you actually think, because one of my beliefs is that it was the digital media mafia that killed candidate experience because they wanted to make.
But hasn't it just put it in the hands of the candidate as well, because they are more self-governing, or their role to a degree is far greater because they can kind of influence or own some of those relationships, or they've got that first touch point, or maybe it's overcomplicated because there's more touch points.
There's more levels and more things that are out of your control. But what I actually mean by that, in terms of there's two things I really notice. One is every email I'm getting and every bit of technology that's being pushed to me is all leading on the same thing. We'll get you more applicants, we'll get you more applicants, we'll get you more applicants. Use this job board, use this multi-poster and it will send it to 23 job boards and this aggregator and that aggregator, and this will get you more and more and more candidates in the pipeline. Last thing I need is more candidates.
Well,
I need to get to the right
better
people.
screening of candidates.
You say that. We have about, and I agree with you, quality should win out over quantity. Should.
Hires.
Should. Correct. But from the perspective of the job board, when we are trying to serve our employer clients, we need to go where the money is.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's what you
And
measured
the
them.
vast, we have at any given time probably about 200 Fortune 500 and federal government clients that are posting jobs, doing emails, whatever with us. And of all of those, I can only think of two that actually look at quality. The vast majority, probably 180 of the 200, have no idea where their applicants are coming from. So if they don't know where their applicants are coming from, they can't even deal with quantity, let alone quality. So then they rely on our reporting to tell them what value we're delivering to them. And if we're going to send a candidate over to the employer's website to apply, the only data we have on that is how many people
Yeah.
looked at your job ad and how many people
People
clicked the
clicked on the
apply
link.
button to
Yeah.
go to your link. So,
And then it's lost.
and
that-
that's it.
But that's not telling you anything at all about the candidate experience, is it? That is
We know
the
about the
ultimate.
candidate experience on our site, and it stops as soon as they hit the apply button and go over to the
Jump off
employer's
their
site.
site.
And the employer has no idea if we send them 200 clicks, who those people are, what the experience they had,
And
whether
what
they were
sorts
the
of-
right people or not. No clue.
Where do you think the candidate experience really begins, though? I really think, I'll go back from putting my content marketing hat on, I really think the candidate experience begins in a more passive role. I think it begins as us as a body of employers come together to put forward different content marketing initiatives, different thought leadership content. You teach them how to be smarter in their job search. You teach them about these ATS systems. You teach them what to look for. You teach them what we screen for. And then that way I think you can improve the quality of candidates that are coming
Although,
through.
is that generally what candidates are actually interested in? Because I think it's much more around looking at actually what should we be doing. Number one, we should be persuading people not to apply. That should be our focus. Not persuading people to apply. So the people who are left in the pipeline are people who are right.
We give
That's
people
where the thing is.
opportunities to deselect
To
themselves.
deselect
Yeah.
themselves. So I think some really important data that came out of Candidate Experience Awards is that it takes, the average is 75 applicants to fill a job in the UK, 85 in the US is the volume that you need. You need 75 or 85 people. Now, the average corporate recruiter is handling 30 recs at any one time, right? So if you're handling 30 recs and you have to have 85 applicants in that pipeline, do the numbers.
Are you saying it's
No,
obligatory to have 75 or you won't make
No,
the
that's what
placement?
you have
It's
to
a
have.
KPI.
That's the
But
ratio. That's the average. That's the
Yeah.
ratio. So what you've got is how organisations are now are attacking that is saying, how do I get 85 because I need them, rather than how do I turn that 85 into 40, into 20?
Well,
how do I do my
if you're
job
talking
better?
about, if you're talking about job boards and employers, where it starts with is the quality of the advert, and the job boards can assert themselves over their advertisers and say, well, look, we insist on a certain standard of adverts because the
Is that
content.
not a little bit chicken and egg though? I mean,
That's
what-
no, no,
what comes first, the job
no,
or
no.
the ad?
But
We have 100,000 jobs on our site.
yeah,
Probably 300 of them are manually posted.
yeah.
We don't see them until they're live because
Yeah.
they come directly from the
But all that
ATS.
content dictates
So
the quality of your site.
the employer has to run those postings by legal for very good reasons. That's one of those cases where, as a fully recovered lawyer, I would say lawyers add value.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to put into there no Irish need apply. That's a bad thing. Legal will almost always, with a larger organization, review the posting and make sure it's compliant. Then that job goes into the ATS in exactly the same form. It's posted to 3, 5, 10 different boards. If
Right.
one board pushes back on the employer and says, it's not a well-written job posting, typical response from a corporate recruiter is, you are so right, I agree with you 100%,
Yeah.
and if you don't want the posting, cancel our contract, because there is nothing we can do about it. The boards do not have control over the postings.
So when the employers
They
say
just don't.
we're getting too many applications, we don't like how this is working.
Oh, well,
what
they're
are
not
you going to
saying
do about
But
it?
then you,
They're
go
gen-
to,
they're
but then you
generally
talk to
not-
the corporate
They're
recruiter
generally
about
not saying
that.
that though, are they? What they're doing is they're just looking at a sheet and saying, right, how many people applied from Monster, how many people applied from
Correct. More the
College
better.
Recruiter, how many, the more the
And
better.
the HR manager will say, 85 applicants and you got one hire. Next month, I want you to get 95 applicants and we'll have one hire. Because if you go to your boss and you say, you know what, last month we had more applicants for our jobs than we do this month, you're not doing
Yeah.
a good job.
But that's
That-
not.
And
But
that's
that-
completely backwards from what it
Yeah.
should be.
I know certainly when we looked at Barclays, and you talked to Andy Hire at Hodes, who I know was on our hangout earlier,
Yeah.
and when they put together the social page, one of the first impacts was they increased the stickability, the amount of time spent on site, the amount of content looked at, how engaged the candidates were with the
Conversions
site.
were up.
They reduced the actual applications by about 65%. And the conversations I believe that were going on were, we need to stop this. Like, we're not going to be able to do any hiring. Nobody's applying.
If we're
for a
talking
job.
about the candidate
But they
experience, if you
changed
give
their
the
whole-
candidates the information, they will
Yeah.
self-select more accurately.
Well,
They
but I
will say,
think-
well, this job does not
That's
suit
not
me.
for me.
Why would I apply for it?
But also in the last session that we ran, which was around mobile recruiting, and Ari Ball was here from Sodexo, and what she made the point on mobile technology, which applies here as well for me, is that one size doesn't fit all. And there inevitably will be some jobs that will receive volume applications, because that's
Yeah.
the kind of role. And there'll be other niche jobs where actually you could almost do with a few more candidates. The question to me is, irrespective of whether you get thousands or several, is then what is that candidate experience? And your point, Bill, was that in the Candies, some of the things that came out of that data was quite surprising, and that I think one of the most surprising facts of all was that 60% of companies didn't discover from candidates what they thought of the experience. So that's the obvious
At any
question.
point.
You've got this huge candidate database, instead of us all sitting around trying to second guess what candidates want, ask candidates what they want.
Yeah, I think the other thing from that, when we're talking about the 60%, is also at what point. So those
Yeah.
40% that are surveyed are generally end of the process. How was the whole process? The candidate doesn't remember what it was like to click on that job board, what it was like to go in. They'll
But they
tend
do remember the recruiter behind that process.
Yeah, they'll remember exactly. And so they'll remember the recruiter, and they'll also remember what was their last experience, what was the last thing that
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they might have gone through 2 interviews and had a great experience. Then when you decided you weren't interested and they just didn't hear from you, they will then go, my candidate experience really sucked.
Yeah.
Now, you get the converse end of that, because if they get the job at the end of that, even though they've had to go through a lot of pain to get that job, they'll go, oh yeah, my
Was that right?
candidate.
Right, it's
was
much more
good."
interesting to talk to the candidates, the applicants who weren't hired. Even more interesting to talk to the candidates who chose not to become
But it has to.
applicants.
They have to be talked to, which again was something that came out of the survey. When we're talking about what is good practice, what does good candidate experience look like, you have to talk to them at the point of that experience,
Yes.
because so it needs to be the instant one or
Immediate
two
survey
questions in
feedback.
that process. Right, you've just filled this in. How
How was
difficult
it?
was it?
Yeah.
How was it? How long did it take?
Well,
you?
in every
Give us 3
application-
stars, 4 stars, whatever.
In every
it is.
application, there are various choke points where
Yeah.
candidates, and if you're tracking it, where you can tell a certain proportion of candidates are dropping it and walking away frustrated,
Absolutely.
and pulling their hair
About
out.
And
45%.
to that point, I've worked with a lot of universities in the Metro Detroit area back in the U.S. And the biggest thing that I'm hearing from the graduating seniors is I'm trying to help them and mentor them and teach them about LinkedIn and how do you apply for a job and what do you do. That process of uploading a resume that you're taught to make so beautifully in college and in university is completely devalued. You completely strip it when you upload it into a system, and then that whole mechanical process after that is just cumbersome. People walk away, people get frustrated, they don't know if they're being replied to, and I think we have a long way to go to improve from a technical standpoint that experience.
It's back to the human thing, though. I think when we look at what's coming out of the survey, it's things like good practice is the way in which you respond to a progress report is equal to the last action. So if there is a voice action, there's a voice follow-up. If there is an email, there's an
Reply.
email. If there's a written application, there's an acknowledgement, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So the expectation of the candidate is whatever we did that you instigated, I expect you to close it in the same way. So, and I think this is a big one for recruiters. I know certainly from an agency point of view, a big one I used to get was they were all over me, they were ringing me, hounding me to source me. They found my details, hounding me until I came back to them and told them what I was going to do. I've got really excited and said, yeah, great, I've gone off to the job, and then
Nothing.
that's it. And I think something that was noticeable in all the interviews when we were talking about the distinction with us was the distance between the hiring manager and the hiring determines the candidate experience. So where hiring managers are responsible for feedback, when they're directly dealing with candidates, interviewing candidates, doing that kind of thing, the candidate experience is considerably better.
Yeah.
Because when a hiring manager has to give feedback, they will make sure they do an interview, even if nothing else, to be able to go back and say, right, here's my reasons. This is why I've selected this one I haven't. When they're just saying to the recruiters,
Nope.
you deal with it. No, we're not doing it. I mean, things like, if I look at Oracle, what Oracle do, recruiters do not interview candidates. They source and select who should be seen. They don't interview anyone.
It's just the hiring manager.
Hiring managers interview. And that's very much the recruiting team there is driving it by saying, right, the only thing we can impact is time to present. So you give me a job, I go source, I present. Outside of that, it's out of my control.
And I think that's what the agency market really needs to cotton on to, is the ability to, or rather the acknowledgement that trying to be a 360 recruiter in today's market, I just see it eroding. And I like agencies when I see that they've selected models within the business that are specialists in the part of the process. So what you've said about recruiters not interviewing, I really like that. From an agency model, I would take it a bit like you've obviously got your sources, you've got your account managers, relationship handlers, whatever you want to call them, and I want to see more of that in the agency market, because then the people that are responsible for caring for the candidates actually get the time to do that, and they're never taken away from that bit of work.
Because that's a fundamental thing, isn't it? Particularly when we're talking about high volume recruitment. It's not. I don't think necessarily people don't want to give a good candidate experience, but it's just the resource and the time to deliver that. But also, it's then smartly using, like you said, those ATS systems are there, the principles are there. It's people understanding how to work smartly to deliver it.
But most of the things that would make it better
Really simple.
are small steps that somebody needs to sit down.
Yeah.
And I think we're focusing on the bigger problem, which is out of our control. The ATS, the way the technology works, the job board. Back to that conversation we said at the beginning, really the technology companies should be fixing it. Actually, it starts with recruiters. And a lot of it is down to the fact that nobody actually thinks about recruiter experience. We talk about candidate experience all the time, but actually, if you look at any technology, if you look at any process, if you look at what's going on, right. So the candidate experience is a direct relationship to the recruiter experience. Is the recruiter having too many recs? Do they have enough time? All very well saying we want to talk to them. What happens every time you do anything? We want to introduce social media. We want to introduce brand advocacy. Who's going to do it? Oh, the recruiters are going to do it. Oh, we want to make our candidate experience. We think every candidate should get a call. Who's going to do it? Oh, the recruiter will do that. They'll be responsible for that. And what else are they going to do? Well, actually, we need to do a bit more hiring. So we need to give you some more recs.
There's a big mismatch there where, as I was saying at the start, the candidates already have a low expectation level. They expect that it's going to be a difficult process. But there's a high expectation put on recruiters to do this, that and the other, and they think, well, you're asking too much of us. We can't handle this. So there's a mismatch there. There's a promise being made that's not being delivered. And that mismatch is resulting.
I just think when the recruiter it's like anything, right? So let's think about it in basic retail principles, customer service. We know if the guy who works in the store on the till has a bad employer experience or relationship, his relationship with the customer, when the customer's saying, can you fix this for me, can you get that, I've got a problem, is kind of like, not my problem.
Stuff runs downhill.
Stuff that, I've done my bit.
Yeah.
You came in and asked for this, I gave it to you over the counter, that's my job.
Really interesting when you talk about the recruiter experience, and I was thinking about exactly the same sort of painting myself a picture of walking into a retail shop and you're the retail clerk and your boss has just been yelling at you all day. Well, are you going to treat that candidate as nicely as they should be treated? Unlikely.
Yeah.
All right? When was
Treat
the
them
last
nicely,
time?
you'll be
You're going to take it out on who you view as the lowest common
It's
denominator.
not right,
Okay,
but it's
for
human
sure.
nature. It's just, I think you have to be an incredible person not to.
Yeah.
When was the last time you ever heard a recruiter say, I love my ATS? The only time I ever hear that is from the time that they sign the contract until they go live. And then that day on, they can't wait until they replace that ATS with the next ATS.
In order to use it in exactly the same way.
Sounds like
and
buying
shift
a
all
book.
their,
Right.
and shift all their crappy
when
data
we're
onto
talking
it.
Which is
earlier
exactly
about-
what happens with your recruitment database. We need to buy a new database so we can do exactly the same thing.
With exactly the same
And we were
data.
talking earlier about the employer branding, and I think we kind of glossed over that a bit, but if I may, our data shows that the stronger the employer's brand is, the higher the quantity and quality of applicants they get.
Yeah.
And I do agree that that's a fundamental piece. In the Candidate Experience Awards, I don't
Yeah.
recall any of the employers, including employers with distinction, really addressing
But
the brand of
do you
their...
think that's as well though, because if a candidate's referred through the process, that people feel more they've got to look after that candidate because somebody else recommended them? I wonder if candidates are actually treated differently when they come via that route versus a kind of anonymous...
Referral.
I'm not speaking specifically about referrals. I'm speaking
Okay.
about employers with a strong, good employer brand. You can have a strong, negative employer brand. But I'm talking about employers that really care and that communicate not just what they sell, but their culture, what it's like to work here.
Adding value
Let-
for
let-
the
let-
job
let me-
seeker outside
yeah.
of just pushing jobs to them all
Let me
day.
throw something in here, and this is a conversation I hear all the time from both corporate and agency recruiters. Very similar. They'll say, we need to take care of the good candidates. Good. There's already a distinction. If you fit a mould, if you've got X number of years experience, you've got this, you've got that language, we need to really take care of you because you're a valuable commodity.
Yeah.
Everybody else is a poor candidate, therefore they get a poor level of service. And then when you get into the conversation, you almost get it of, that, you know, let's look at it. Back to lessons from the Candidate Experience Awards. 70% of the applications received were considered unsuitable or unqualified for the job they applied. Only 20% of people had never seen a job description.
Yeah.
They were clicking on a link to a job, whether it was on a job board or it was a social media link, whatever it was.
And
They were
are these
clicking on a
jobs being vetted by a recruiter before given to the hiring
It's not even
manager?
going there because as soon as it goes into the ATS, it goes on the job. It's hitting Stephen's job board before a person has actually seen it.
On our site, they have to see it.
Right.
But there are many boards where you can run your search, you get 10, 20, 50
Yeah.
results, and you just go check, apply. And your application, if you're pre-registered with your board, your resume, your CV goes to the 18 employers that you just applied to.
most-
So you know the job title,
Yeah.
you know the employer, you know the city, state/province, and that's about it.
Is there an opportunity to customize the resume at all? Because there's a lot of value in being able to
With those
pull
boards,
certain
no.
experiences out.
With those
that
boards, no.
complement the job.
With boards like ours that require you to look at the job description before you can get to the application.
Can I just ask
yeah.
But in many
Can I
cases, you
just
don't
ask
even know
why
the
that-
employers. The
can I just
candidates are
ask why
applying
that
for
has a
jobs
value?
that they don't know.
To modify your resume?
Modifying and customizing
Why?
it.
I would say from my standpoint, I mean, you look at someone, I work in marketing, my experience level is so broad. If I'm applying for a job that only focuses on 25% of my 100% of my experience, clearly I'm not gonna talk about me being a web programmer and a developer for a generalist
Yeah.
marketing role.
Can I just ask you one question in this, because this is a really important point. Do you customise a resume, CV? You have to remember which
Yes,
language
CV,
we're in.
yes.
If we're customising a CV, are we creating a CV for the interview or for the ATS?
For the ATS, I think, first.
Is the reality. The reality is we have to be creating a document which is going to hit the right number of keywords, do the right stuff, which is going
And
to
that's
get us
exactly
through-
part of the strategy
through
that
the
you
machine.
find. If you're using the word graphic designer instead of artist
Yeah.
in the job description, me personally, I would, instead of using the word graphic designer, I would say graphic artist.
Yeah.
That way you're increasing your probability of making that first pass.
So what you're actually doing is you're trying to get to the next stage. You're not necessarily thinking about the fact that it's going to end up in someone. So I think once we're doing that, so what are we doing? You know, we're driving a lot of our process away from saying any kind of human interaction, any kind of human selection, any kind of the machines are making the decisions for us.
But I don't think all the candidates understand that, do they? That's the issue as well.
Oh, virtually none understand that.
And
It
why
was-
should they?
Actually,
was-
candidates
it was a
Why,
study.
why should they understand that?
Well,
Yeah.
if they did understand it, they could, back to Mona's point, then they could not find a way through the system, but find a better way of promoting themselves when they might be that best fit for the job.
I mean, ultimately, you want the job if you feel like you're the right fit for it. So from my standpoint, you're really going to look at how you can pass the different phases, and that intelligence
But let's
is important.
let's go back and think about. Let's go back and look at the service industry, right? And let's say if we considered
Do we have to?
if we considered recruiting to be a service industry, in terms of providing a service
Or
to people,
or disservice, as the
or
case may be.
disservice rather than a technical function, we also know You know, if we look at restaurants, so very simple fast food chains I've looked at, I did some training for some years ago, and actually said, look, the only difference we can make, if we sell a burger, we like to say ours is the best, but it's pretty much the ingredients are about the same.
Yeah.
We might put an extra bit of lettuce or an extra onion ring on it or something, but generally the only way we can make a difference between this brand and that brand is how we actually deliver that. The actual point, the server who comes to your table and says, deals with you in the right way, gets it out there nice and quick, is very polite to you. And I think a lot of that, once we start panning that back into recruiting, that's when we start looking at it. How can we actually serve people in the way that they should and that they should rightfully expect? Part of that is technology, because you need that bit right. Part of that is process, that we need to have the right process that enables to do it. Ultimately, it's person.
Yeah.
How am I, and what is in my control? I can't change my ATS, but I can decide that I'm going to... so what we found in the Candidate Experience Awards was the people who were really standing out, the recruiter had made a conscious decision, usually because they had to, because they were in a skill-short market, rather than because they decided they wanted to. You know, no disrespect to anyone, we didn't discover a lot of the winners were in call centres or contact centres or general.
That's right.
They were usually in
High tech,
insurance, high demand, niche areas where they were going, very small market, and actually they were improving the candidate experience because of their reputation control rather than saying no one will apply for us.
It sounds like they've got the freedom to do that, though. It sounds like the people the individuals that did that were in a culture that allowed them to do that. Whether or not the culture told them to, it's almost like implicit that they could, so they might as well.
Or they created it. There were several people.
There was
that
a few
I
people
talked
who
with.
created it.
Yeah.
They'd made it.
But they weren't
into-
stopped. They didn't. No one came up to them and said, "Are you being completely mad?"
Yeah.
So they were still. There was still an environment that
They
made it
were-
acceptable.
There was one guy, in fairness to him, that I shouldn't identify him by name or his company, but he was told, "You are mad," and his boss.
A few people like that.
And basically, his boss gave him enough rope so he could hang himself.
But then he won.
And I thought one of the really compelling things about that company's story was that they went after the candidate experience not because they felt that it was the right moral thing to do. It was, but that wasn't the business reason. To convince their chief levels, they had to make the financial case.
Yeah.
Which
If
is
we
always
improve the
point.
candidate experience, we will generate more revenue, save more money, or both.
Yeah, I
And
think
they have to be able to show that.
what they did at Starbucks when they were able to say, actually, 80% of our candidates are customers,
Yeah.
and they're spending this number of dollars,
Yeah.
and if we upset them, this is the revenue risk. And when they were able to do that and
Yeah.
go back and
Yeah.
say, there's $27 million at risk here by candidate experience, some
Right.
people are going,
Oh, that sounds
And,
like
and that's
pretty
harder
important.
with a B2B business.
Exactly.
Right, but if a B2B business has a better candidate experience and you go from 85 CVs to 35, and the recruiter can now spend twice as long with each candidate, that in and of itself is going to improve the candidate experience and the recruiter experience.
Yeah.
You're going to end up with a higher quality hire, and you're going to end up with lower
Less
cost to
turnover.
source, less turnover. Exactly.
Less
I think,
negative.
I think we need to conclude because we're running out of time. It's been a great conversation, but just one point from you, that something final thought on candidate experience?
I think candidate experience has a lot to do with, giving them the feeling that they're welcome, feeling of empathy, feeling of understanding, feeling of respect. And once that is there, then I think that forms the basis for a good candidate experience.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Stephen, one sentence for you.
I think the industry needs to make a rod for its own back, raise expectations and live up to them.
Excellent. Lisa?
I think from an agency recruiter perspective, I want to see less assumptions that their clients are responsible for candidate experience and less reliance on systems for providing that experience.
No?
I'd like to see us start thinking about the candidate experience, starting a few steps before the candidate actually starts
attraction
to apply.
experience.
Yeah.
I'd like to see more recruiters, corporate recruiters especially, be financially rewarded for how well they treat the candidate.
As they are in other industries.
To me, I think it's just doing some of the simple things really well. You can stand out by kind of taking personal ownership to give that good level of customer service.
It's like everything, the level of service that people receive in general is so poor that the things that make it great are actually quite small. You know, that doesn't matter whether it's retail, restaurants, recruiting. The things which make a difference to the candidates are actually the small things which are in our control, although we can have the longer term aim of doing that. So I'd just like to close. I am a council member for the UK Council Candidate Experience Awards, as is Stephen, and Lisa is in the advisory and content role for really helping drive the agenda. I want to thank Kelly for continuing to support the UK Candidate Experience Awards, you know, and making that possible from a UK point of view. And really to say to anyone listening in, if you're sitting here nodding your head and saying, yeah, candidate experience is important, take part. It's not an award, it's not a prize which is for best company who bought a table. It isn't one of those. We have enough of those. You know, it's not a black tie dinner. It is about benchmarking what you do against what other companies do, and being able to see how you do that. You may want to do that publicly, you may want to do it anonymously. It's free to take part, it's sponsor funded, so from people like Kelly. So it's free to take part. If you really care about candidate experience, you'd want to be a part of this. If you don't want to be a part of it, you don't really care about candidate experience.
Okay.
That's all I've got to say.
Thank you everybody for a really interesting session as ever. We're going to take a short break now. We'll be back online at about 2 o'clock talking about employer branding.
Thank you.